The strategic port city of Tobruk became the intense focal point of the brutal North African campaign during World War II, pushing Allied forces to their absolute limits in a desperate struggle to maintain control. By June 1942, General Erwin Rommel's German forces were in retreat, having been pushed back by the British Eighth Army. The Allies had recently celebrated the hard-fought liberation of Tobruk after a grueling 8-month siege, where the tenacious defense of the 9th Australian Division had held the port against seemingly insurmountable Axis odds. In the aftermath of expelling the weakened and depleted Axis forces from eastern Libya, the Allied High Command, underestimating Rommel's resilience, believed a swift counteroffensive to be highly improbable. Consequently, General Neil Ritchie confidently redeployed a significant portion of the experienced 8th Army back to Egypt, replacing them with less seasoned troops. This fatal miscalculation paved the way for Rommel's swift and powerful counteroffensive, which overwhelmed the thinly stretched Commonwealth forces. By June 20th, Tobruk was once again under Axis siege, and the ensuing battle profoundly altered the trajectory of the war in North Africa. As World War II engulfed Europe, Italy, recognizing its own military unpreparedness, initially sought to remain neutral under Benito Mussolini's leadership. However, as the fall of France became inevitable, Mussolini saw an opportune moment, with Britain and France heavily engaged on other fronts. He believed the time was ripe to pursue his long-held ambition of expanding Italy's African territories and resurrecting the Roman Empire under his dominion. Emboldened by the rapid collapse of France before the German Wehrmacht, the Duce was confident that Britain and the remaining allies would soon crumble. Mussolini felt Italy was at a disadvantage compared to other European powers due to its limited colonial holdings. Securing control of Gibraltar and the Suez Canal in British-controlled Egypt would, in his view, guarantee Italian dominance over the southern Mediterranean coast. Thus, on June 10, 1940, as France teetered on the brink of collapse under the German Blitzkrieg, Italy declared war on Britain and France and immediately launched an invasion of British-held Egypt. Mussolini's surprise offensive initially met with success. Italian forces managed to gain some territory in Egypt, capturing the strategically important port city of Sidi Barrani. The British forces defending Egypt, known as the Western Desert Force, were numerically inferior and thinly spread across a vast expanse. However, what they lacked in numbers, they more than compensated for in experience and strategic acumen. Richard O'Connor, the astute British commanding officer in the region, skillfully employed deception and intelligence to gain the upper hand on the Italian invaders. After establishing a defensive perimeter, O'Connor cleverly disguised his limited-number tanks by deploying inflatable rubber decoys alongside actual armored vehicles, effectively misleading the Italians into believing they faced a much larger force. Confronted by what appeared to be an overwhelming enemy, Italy decided to halt the defensive, granting O'Connor crucial time to regroup and formulate a counterattack. Despite having only 36,000 men at his disposal compared to the Italian force of over 180,000, O'Connor, leveraging superior strategy and the vital support of the Royal Air Force, launched a decisive strike against the invading forces, driving them out of Egypt. O'Connor's offensive didn't stop at the border. He relentlessly pursued the increasingly demoralized Italian army deep into Italian Libya. By January 12th, the vital port city of Tobruk was surrounded, and just 10 days later, it fell to O'Connor's forces. A staggering 27,000 Italian soldiers were captured, along with significant quantities of fuel, supplies, food, and weapons. In a remarkable campaign lasting less than 2 months, O'Connor's forces had advanced over 800 miles, effectively annihilated an entire Italian army of 10 divisions, captured over 130,000 prisoners, 400 tanks, and 1,292 guns, all at the remarkably low cost of only 500 casualties and 1,373 wounded. This devastating loss was a profound humiliation for Italy, and Adolf Hitler was reportedly furious. By the beginning of 1941, Hitler's frustration and embarrassment over Italy's crushing defeat in North Africa were palpable. To make matters worse, Mussolini's ill-advised attack on Egypt had resulted in Italy losing most of Libya, including all its crucial ports, providing the Allies with significant logistical advantage for a potential future liberation of Europe. Consequently, Hitler made a decision to deploy German troops to North Africa to bolster the struggling Italians and attempt to reverse the tide of the conflict. The command of this newly formed force, which would become infamous as the Afrika Korps, was entrusted to a brilliant and highly experienced general named Erwin Rommel. Upon arriving in what remained of Italian-occupied Libya, Rommel launched an audacious surprise offensive, exploiting the fact that the Commonwealth forces in the area did not anticipate a counterattack from the demoralized Italians after their recent catastrophic defeat. In the ensuing months, Rommel swiftly recaptured Libya and forced the Allied forces to retreat back into Egypt. However, a significant exception was the heavily fortified port city of Tobruk. Unable to capture outright, Rommel was compelled to lay siege and await reinforcements and supplies. Inside the city, a single division, composed primarily of Australian soldiers, mounted a legendary defense for over 8 long months until December 7th, when a reinforced Allied counteroffensive launched from Egypt, codenamed Operation Crusader, finally broke the siege and pushed Rommel back westward. Having failed to capture Tobruk, Rommel's supply line stretched precariously all the way back to the distant port of Tripoli, over 1,000 miles away. Facing critical shortages of fuel, food, and ammunition, he was forced to retreat as the Allies liberated Tobruk. The valiant efforts of the defenders became a powerful source of pride and a significant morale boost for all Allied soldiers engaged in the war. However, this Allied victory would prove to be tragically short-lived. Once again, the Allies, perhaps lulled into a false sense of security, assumed that the defeated Rommel was significantly weakened and depleted, confidently expecting him to adopt defensive positions further back in western Libya. However, Rommel was about to deliver another stunning surprise. On January 21st, 1942, he launched yet another swift and powerful offensive, catching the startled and unprepared Allied forces completely off guard. Rommel advanced rapidly, employing relentless and skillful encircling maneuvers. The Allied forces could only slow his progress as he approached the familiar strategic prize of Tobruk. The opposing forces eventually reached a stalemate approximately 60 miles west of the city, where the Allied troops established a defensive semicircle comprised of trenches, barbed wire entanglements, strategically placed landmines, and anti-tank obstacles. Rommel, recognizing the impossibility of a direct assault on Tobruk from the west due to the formidable Allied entrenchments, devised a new strategy. On May 27th, the Axis forces attempted a daring maneuver to outflank the Allied defenses by attacking from the south. The Allied forces barely managed to hold their lines in the south, but Rommel, with characteristic speed and decisiveness, swiftly redeployed his forces back west and, with the crucial assistance of Italian units, successfully encircled the defending troops in the northwestern sector of the Allied defensive semicircle. On June 11th, with their defensive barrier breached and collapsing, the Allied forces were compelled to retreat back into the city of Tobruk. As the Axis forces closed in, the situation within the city descended into chaos. Adding to the confusion, the 8th Army commander, Neil Ritchie, received conflicting and often contradictory instructions from his superiors. Military commanders issued directives emphasizing that under no circumstances should his troops become trapped within the city. Simultaneously, urgent telegrams from Prime Minister Winston Churchill himself demanded that Tobruk must not fall to the advancing Axis forces. Furthermore, Ritchie was instructed that in the event of the imminent fall of Tobruk, the 8th Army should evacuate, but only after destroying all resources that could potentially fall into enemy hands. A nearby airfield, containing tens of thousands of gallons of precious fuel, along with significant stockpiles of food rations and ammunition crates, were a particular concern to the Allied High Command. Ultimately, as the Axis advance appeared unstoppable, Ritchie made the difficult decision to evacuate. The 13th and 30th Corps were ordered to retreat eastward towards Egypt, leaving behind only the 2nd South African Division with the inevitable task of holding the city against Rommel's relentless assault. By June 18th, Rommel's forces had completely surrounded Tobruk, and tragically, the Allies had failed to destroy the majority of the vital supplies. That very night, Rommel confidently reported to Hitler that Tobruk was once again under Axis siege. The decisive battle for the besieged city commenced on June 19th, as Rommel meticulously rearranged his troops in preparation for the final assault. The attack was unleashed at 5:20 a.m. on June 20th, with a concentrated and devastating air bombardment targeting the southeastern boundary of the Allied defenses. The German Luftwaffe executed a staggering 588 individual bombing raids. This aerial onslaught was followed at 7 a.m. by intense artillery barrages along the entire front. Coinciding with the incursion of Gruppe Mini, a powerful battalion spearheaded by 38 medium tanks. A critical breach in the Allied defensive line was achieved by 7:45 a.m., and the German 900th Engineer Battalion swiftly bridged a formidable anti-tank ditch using prefabricated assault bridging equipment. The 4th Battalion of the Royal Tank Regiment received instructions to launch an immediate counterattack, but the crucial orders arrived too late. By the time the Allied tanks reached the point of the enemy breakthrough, the majority of the German tanks had already successfully crossed the anti-tank ditches. The experienced Afrika Korps then effectively defeated the outnumbered British armor through skillful divide-and-conquer maneuvers, significantly aided by a relentless and withering attack from Luftwaffe aircraft. By noon, Rommel had successfully inserted a significant force of 113 tanks deep into the Allied perimeter. Just an hour later, the spearhead of the Afrika Korps reached the strategically vital King's Cross intersection on the Pilastrino Ridge, a key terrain feature overlooking the city. The last significant barrier for the advancing panzers was a collection of Allied artillery units, which, with extraordinary tenacity, put up a fierce and determined resistance, even employing several 3.7-inch anti-aircraft guns in a desperate direct-fire role against the German tanks. Rommel himself later hailed their extraordinary tenacity. By 6 p.m., Axis troops had penetrated into the city itself, and the remaining Allied units desperately attempted to burn as many of the remaining supplies as possible while simultaneously destroying their own crucial communication equipment to prevent it from falling into enemy hands. However, despite these efforts, most of the Allied units ceased organized fire or withdrew to the relative safety of Fort Pilastrano to the west only 45 minutes later. The final, desperate evacuation of small Allied naval vessels took place under heavy fire. 15 small craft managed to escape the besieged harbor, but a tragic 25 others, including a minesweeper, were sunk either in the harbor itself or lost to devastating Axis airstrikes as they attempted to reach the Allied naval base at Alexandria. At dawn the following day, June 21st, 1942, the remaining Allied forces within Tobruk officially capitulated. It represented the second largest surrender of British forces since the devastating fall of Singapore earlier in the war. An estimated 32,200 Allied soldiers were captured and subsequently taken to prisoner of war camps in Italy. In addition to the massive number of prisoners, Rommel's forces captured a staggering quantity of vital supplies that the Allies had failed to effectively destroy. This crushing defeat resonated deeply throughout the Western world, severely damaging the morale of the Allied troops engaged in the North African campaign. Prime Minister Winston Churchill received news of this devastating defeat while meeting with President Franklin D. Roosevelt at the White House. The Prime Minister was visibly in shock and would later poignantly recall, "I did not attempt to hide from the President the shock I had received. It was a bitter moment. Defeat is one thing, disgrace is another. There were no reproaches. Not an unkind word was spoken. 'What can we do to help?' said Roosevelt. I replied at once, 'Give us as many Sherman tanks as you can spare and ship them to the Middle East as quickly as possible.'" The Fall of Tobruk in 1942 marked a significant turning point in the North African theater. Bolstered by the vast quantities of newly captured supplies, Rommel's Afrika Korps would become virtually unstoppable for many months to come, pushing Allied troops in Libya and Egypt to the very brink of destruction and setting the stage for further intense and bloody battles in the desert.